Episode of the Three Presbyteers. My name is Aaron Garriott. I'm associate pastor here at Spruce Creek Presbyterian Church, a Reformed church in Port Orange, Florida, if you're looking for a church like that in the area. And I am joined here today with my other Presbyteers brothers.
I'm Josh Owen, the pastor here at Spruce Creek Presbyterian Church.
And I'm ruling elder Gabe Williams and church administrator, not secretary, here at Spruce Creek.
Are you assistant to the regional manager or assistant regional manager?
No, I run the show.
You run it. Okay, that's what I thought. Well, if you tuned in to our part one of sins of the tongue, you remember that Josh was not here for that episode, and I feel like he didn't get a big enough slice of the pie. So we asked him to come back and we would do a part two on the 9th commandment and Christian speech, because Josh is way better at bridling the tongue than I am. So I felt as if we need to continue this conversation. But if you did not listen to that episode, feel free to go back and listen to the first part of this topic, where Gabe and I sort of systematically walk through some of the sins that are forbidden in the 9th commandment from Westminster Larger Catechism, question 145. And if you're familiar with that section, question 144 concerns the things that are required in the 9th commandment. And here we're walking through some of those sins that are forbidden in the 9th commandment. So I thought what we would do for this episode is pick out a few more of those sins that are forbidden that we don't ordinarily think about. And that's why some of these are so dangerous, because they are those kind of common acceptable sins of the church, where they're invisible at times. Sometimes they're more obvious, and we don't really give much thought to them. It's actually one of the reasons at the very beginning of my research for the book, A Word Fitly Spoken, that I realized that many Christians give a lot of thought to what we do as Christians, but not as much to what we say. And that should be lamented. I mean, James gives a lot of airtime to the sins of the tongue, and he's walking through why this should not be. And then in James chapter 3, he refers to the wisdom from above.
Yeah.
So if you're struggling with sins of the tongue, education can't fix it. Even mere willpower can't subdue it. You need wisdom from above. Well, how do you get wisdom? What does the book of Proverbs say? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So don't take these as advice for you to simply pull yourselves up by your bootstraps and become better communicators, to become those who bridle the tongue based on your own strength, but fear God in union and communion with the Lord Jesus Christ. Learn what it looks like to use your tongues to the glory of God.
When I look at some of the things that are on the list that we're going to talk about today, I think about Solomon's advice about words, that a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver, right? There's an appropriateness to apples of gold in settings of silver. And we're not only, as Christians, we shouldn't only be thinking about what am I going to say. Maybe that's the first thing we think about.
Yeah.
What should be said? But we also are asking about why.
Yeah.
Should I say this?
How?
How should I say it?
When?
When should I say this, right? And so, a lot of people think, oh, that's just all unnecessary. No, I think really we need to be asking those questions. If we were to apply all the wisdom that Scripture gives us to tame the tongue, we need to ask those questions. This is not about being the nice guy. This is about being a man of God and taming the tongue.
That's an appropriate segue, because if you read this question 145, which we won't read this again for this episode, but you're welcome to go read it on your own. You see these expressions of what's forbidden in the 9th commandment: speaking the truth unseasonably. Now you might think, well, speaking the truth at all times and in whatever way is necessary is always right. But here the divines are condemning speaking the truth unseasonably. What does that mean, Josh? And what does it look like to speak the truth unseasonably?
Yeah, I think, it's kind of like the Solomon says in Ecclesiastes. There is a season for everything, right? And everything should be done in season, right? And so when we're thinking about our words, my habit, and I think this is part of the difficulty of taming the tongue, is when something comes to my mind, I want to say it.
Yeah.
And sometimes what comes to my mind does need to be said, but it shouldn't be said right then. If it's going to be said in a context where I'm unnecessarily dishonoring someone because I'm going to address a sin or I'm going to address an error, but I could do that without dishonoring that person in the presence of others by just holding my tongue, maybe making a note to myself, I need to talk to so-and-so about this, rather than blurting it out right there in the moment and causing this person unnecessary dishonor in the presence of other people. That I think might just be an example, if you will, of unseasonable truth.
A great example. I always like to think too that the Westminster Divines are kind of engaging in a play of words here, because you can use seasoned in two different ways, in the right season.
Yeah.
But also, as Paul says to the Colossians in Colossians 4:6, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt.
Yeah.
So it's in the appropriate season, but it's also with the appropriate flavor as well. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they were thinking along both of those lines. But
there were like 120 men that were contributing to the Westminster Assembly and, vetting all of these things. So I imagine out of the dozens of men whose eyes were on this at one time or another, that you're right.
I'm sure they were eating seasoned and salted pork at the time they were writing some of this. That could have been at the forefront of their mind.
Yeah.
So just because
unless it was during Lent.
So just because you have something truthful to say doesn't always mean that you say it at that moment in that season.
Or harshly. Think of Jesus and the adulterous woman. He told her a pretty hard truth. He gave her a command not to sin anymore, but he didn't treat her the way she was being treated by those who were about to stone her. He was frank but gentle with her. And I think there's, that goes to your proper spiciness, proper level of spice.
It's a good example. Yeah. So speaking the truth unseasonably, also speaking the truth maliciously to a wrong end. Gabe, you want to take that one?
I have to be careful not to be too specific so as to get myself in trouble. But, I think I know we've seen a lot of that over the last year or two, where it appears that people will reveal the shortcomings of others in order to maybe elevate their own status, remove someone from theirs, make new friends, be seen as trusted among. The motives sometimes for some of the things that we've seen and heard over the last couple of years are often questionable. So if my purpose in speaking the truth to or about someone is their downfall rather than their restoration, then I would be in sin toward that person and to those who hear. Because if you're, telling the truth to a maliciously to a wrong end, you're also changing the way these other people see and maybe respect that person. And if that person is someone who has loved them well, cared for them well, taught them well, and then that brings all of that into question for the hearer. So you're doing them a disservice as well. So I think, Jesus gives us a command in Matthew 18 to confront sin and be truthful about it. But the purpose is always for the restoration of the sinner, not for his embarrassment, punishment, what have you. So I think we have to be very careful about that. Why are we going to say what we're about to say? Is it for a righteous purpose?
And now I would add that there are times when words need to tear down.
Sure.
I think about the commission. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was Jeremiah that God said, I'm going to send you to tear down and to build up.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
You know,
Yeah, the very beginning. Yep.
that
Yeah.
his prophetic commission as he speaks God's words is going to be to tear down. Now, the tearing down is for a proud, insolent, rebellious people who need to be confronted in a very provocative way, in a very blatant way about their sin and unrepentance. So there, in a sense, there is he's not winning friends and influencing people. He is speaking hard truth. But I think we need to be careful that we don't take every opportunity to speak hard truths in that same vein.
Yeah.
Like there's a particular context in which Jeremiah was going to, God says to Ezekiel, they have a hard head, I'm going to make your head harder. These prophets were going up against definitely hard-headed individuals, and hard truth had to be spoken in order to tear down those who were proud and lofty in their minds against God. And there are times when we need to speak similar truths to people who aren't necessarily as dead set against God as what the prophets were up against, but they still need to be confronted. And I think that's where we need to be careful. Okay, we're going to do some tearing down here, but the demolition isn't going to look like the kind of devastating, crushing ball that, Jeremiah sent into, the walls of rebellious Israel or Judah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The end of the destruction, rebuilding, or the other imagery that Jeremiah uses, I believe, is that of plucking up and replanting.
Yeah.
So the end of that is a field, a harvest of righteousness, which James again picks up in James 3. Right? I think of, when Paul tells the Ephesians to speak the truth in love. I think a lot of times people understand what Paul is saying there to mean speak the truth, but speak it in a very gentle tone. Now, that might be one application of that, but I think more fundamentally what Paul means is speak the truth out of love and to a loving end.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
It might mean a very harsh word at times.
Yeah.
It might mean a very tough word at times.
Right.
But you're speaking it out of love. You're not speaking
Right.
it to a malicious end. And,
Right.
and that's what's in.
If somebody
in
is
here.
getting ready to step out into traffic and they don't see the
Yeah.
danger coming and you yell,
That's right.
you're still speaking the truth in love. You're not being gentle at that point. You are yelling to get their attention. And it might be a similar scenario morally
That's right.
speaking.
Yep. So speaking the truth unseasonably, speaking the truth maliciously to a wrong end. And then I want to point out this one, perverting the truth to a wrong meaning. So taking the truth, knowing what the truth is, but twisting it, contorting it, making the truth mean something that it doesn't mean in order to accomplish something. It's a sort of manipulation tactic of taking the truth and misapplying it. The same thing is true with doubtful or equivocal expressions. What's an equivocal expression? Well, you can equivocate by using a term or a phrase that might have two or more meanings in a particular context, and you're not altogether clear about which meaning you're using. Maybe you have a meaning in mind, but you're using that meaning knowing that others don't know exactly what you mean.
I think you can take someone who's in error and then portray them as being unfaithful. And that could be perverting the truth. The truth may be this person's in error, but then you and I think a lot of people won't catch it, right? And that's the trick of the tongue here, is that rather than addressing that, okay, you're in error, brother, to you're unfaithful. See, that's really not the issue, but now it's become the issue in everyone's head. This guy's unfaithful. Well, unfaithfulness, that's a very serious matter, right?
Yeah, that's a good example. When I think of equivocal expressions, I can't help but think of having read a lot of J. Gresham Machen. In Machen's context, in the early 1900s in the Presbyterian Church, he's having to put his foot down along with fellow conservatives on certain key doctrines, like the virgin conception of Jesus Christ, the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And what Machen and his colleagues noticed is that, certain what we would call progressives would affirm the words, yes, of course I believe in the resurrection of Christ. Candidates for ministry, I believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But when you got down to the heart of the matter, what they meant was, well, I believe in a spiritual resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Right.
That Jesus Christ was raised from the dead in my heart, a spiritual resurrection. So they're equivocating by using the phrase, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, implying they mean one thing, when in reality, they actually mean something else.
My favorite story relating to that comes a little later than Machen, but it was an exchange between Carl F. H. Henry, who at the time was a Christian journalist and a Christian worldview thinker, and he had an opportunity to be at a press conference where Karl Barth was being interviewed by the press, and Henry stood up and said, representing Christianity Today, that's how he introduced himself, representing Christianity Today, I'd like to ask you, sir, if the resurrection were to occur today, would it be an event, an historical event, that the men in this room who work for the press would be able to document? And Bart answered that and said, I'm sorry, did you say that you're from Christianity Today or yesterday? Do you remember Carl F. H. Henry's response to that?
I don't.
Yesterday, today, and forever.
I don't remember that. Yeah.
But this is the key. You're exactly what you're saying. Machen was getting at was people who would use the language of resurrection or use the language of incarnation, but actually deny a historical incarnation, deny a historical resurrection. So that's equivocal, clearly. Dubious language.
Yeah, dubious language. That's exactly what it is. Next, thinking or speaking. Notice that, thinking or speaking too highly or too meanly of ourselves or others. I'm reminded of Paul's words in Romans 12, verse 3, where he says, through the grace given unto me, I say to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think. He doesn't say don't think about yourself at all. He doesn't say think too lowly of yourself. He says, but think soberly. Think with sober judgment, according as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith. So understand your own gifts, your own graces, and the gifts of others, and the graces of others with sober judgment. Not thinking too highly of yourself, but also not having a low view of self. Not having a low self-esteem, to use modern parlance, or a high self-esteem, but a sober judgment according to the measure of faith that God has given to each one of us.
I'll make a confession here, and I don't want to exaggerate this, because this is not like some thing that happens every time, but sometimes I've been the oldest guy in the room.
It happens quite a bit.
And the oldest guy in the room, and I'm sitting there looking around and I'm thinking of all the experience that I have in life and the wisdom that I've gained compared to the other young men in the room. Other times I've been the youngest man in the room, and I've looked around the room and I thought, boy, I'm really on top of things, and I'm with it. I know what's going on right now. I'm aware of the trends. I'm aware of and these poor people, they just don't have a clue. It doesn't matter which setting I'm in. I'm automatically putting myself in a position of some superior to those that I'm in the room with, rather than looking at it and say, hey, these are some young men in the room. I bet you they're a little more aware of what's happening in the world right now than I am. And then being in a room with older people, and first thought that I should have is there's a lot of wisdom here. I need to be quiet and I need to listen to what these people have to say. Yeah.
That's how I feel at every session meeting. I need to be quiet and listen to what these older, wiser brothers have to say.
Why do you look at me when you say older? You looked away when you said wiser, but you looked at me when you said older.
No, I looked at you when I said wiser.
That's not the way I saw it.
So have a sober judgment of yourself and let your tongue agree with that.
But you know, too, there's a kind of a that leads to, as you're talking, I'm also thinking, so we should not expect too much or too little from someone at the same time, right? So we shouldn't think so highly of someone that we expect them to behave with perfection. And we shouldn't think so lowly of them that we wouldn't expect them to be able to rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
So that even should dictate our level of admonishment or encouragement.
It's a good word.
Man, we can see, that's what I'm talking about. Older and wiser.
Older and wiser.
That's enough out of you.
Gabe, why don't you take this one next? This one's I've thought about this one pretty often. The aggravation of smaller faults.
Well, what I had in mind may not be the same as what you had in mind, but I think of a lot of the therapeutic language that we hear these days when people decide to become offended over things. A boss or a ministry leader who sees that we should do things with excellence to honor God, the way we worship, the way we preach and teach, the way we conduct ourselves, that there should be a certain expectation because eyes are on us and God is watching, and we are to be an example of piety and sober living. So someone admonishes another for not rising to the occasion. They are often labeled as angry, controlling, abusive, things like that. So, you know, now the person may not always be as gracious as they could be in their delivery, but it doesn't rise to the level of sin. But people magnify these smaller faults until they start labeling them with words that you just can't take back. Once you accuse someone of abuse, someone is always going to look at that person as an abusive person. So, you know, if someone is just a little much, a tough boss, a tough leader, and they have high expectations of their inferiors, they're often labeled as abusive. And I think that aggravating smaller faults. Imagine a man who has it out for one of the other guys on his session, so he needles them during session meetings, relentlessly needling and aggravating. He knows he's impatient. He knows he's is prone to certain behaviors.
So he's pushing buttons.
So he pushes and pushes and pushes, and then finally, it's almost like a toddler does. You know what I mean? They'll aggravate you for attention until you finally go, "What's your problem?" And then they cry, and then you feel like a big lunkhead. And I see it that way too. So there's a magnification of smaller faults, and then there's a needling, pushing buttons to try to get the response, so that we can turn a smaller fault into a sin, in order to then again use that truth maliciously to an evil end.
That's exactly what I had in mind, is both the provoking aspect and the magnifying aspect. And you can, Gabe applied this to one context. I also see this often in marriages, either husbands or wives who push buttons, they provoke, even fathers, the children. Paul says explicitly, do not exasperate your children.
Right.
Don't provoke them.
Right.
but discipline them faithfully. And you'll see this in households where there's a magnifying and a provoking of smaller faults. They're really kind of petty things, but once you begin poking them and prodding them, and then magnifying them, they grow to their worst selves, and then they look like monsters. And it's a way of puffing up and pride, but also of tearing the other person down.
Yeah. I think there's a danger of not recognizing the fault in yourself of oversensitivity. Anybody who is like highly sensitive to, like, emotionally, is going to interpret a lot of people's speech and actions as abusive, aggressive, and so forth. And I think a little bit of self-awareness that, maybe the fault is with me. Maybe am I getting overly offended? Why was I offended? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I bounced back and forth in my youth as between North Carolina and Maryland. Well, those are very different cultures. North Carolina's sweet, they're polite. That's the general culture there. There's a politeness. Maryland is, you're starting to move more toward not quite New England culture, but you're getting there. You're above Mid-Atlantic here. You're kind of, you're at the north of the Mid-Atlantic. And it's, a little more direct, blunt. And, when you're bouncing back and forth between those two societies, you come in and you're too polite to someone in Maryland, they're looking at you like, you trying to manipulate me? What are you trying to do right now? Why are you calling me sir? Ma'am? Are you mocking me? Whereas, somebody from there comes to the South and they're not polite. And immediately someone says, well, that person's rude. Well, no, that person's not rude. You got to understand their context and how, their perception of what normal speech is. They weren't being rude to you.
The last one we'll look at is the unnecessary discovering of infirmities. And I'm sure both of you can think of good applications or examples of this where we all assume the position.
You have COVID?
You assume that, yeah. Not that type of infirmity.
It's not that type of infirmity.
Yeah.
Let's see.
We all assume the position of Sherlock Holmes, where I'm now a private investigator and I'm going to find out the worst thing about this person. I'm going to dig up the dirt, all the dirt I can find about this person for whatever malicious end it might be. And I'm going to find everything I can. And then I'm going to spread it on the blogs. I'm going to spread it to others. I'm going to use it to tarnish the good name of this person.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the last clause of this question 145, it's avoiding anything or not hindering what we can do, or not hindering what we can in others, such things as procure an ill name. That's what the ninth commandment is really all about, the preservation of truth and the preservation of the good name of our neighbor. And this is unnecessarily discovering the faults, the infirmities, the weaknesses, even the sins of other brothers and sisters, so as to procure for them an ill name. What's an example or two before we close that you guys might be able to think of that falls under that category?
Well, just this coming Sunday, I'm going to be preaching on Shimei and his abuse of David when he's coming out of Jerusalem, fleeing from Absalom, and he's sitting there railing upon him that God is now getting you for the evil you did to the house of Saul.
He's a member of Saul's household, right?
That's right. That's right. And knowing, I mean, the biblical record tells us that David did good by the house of Saul, protected them as much as he could, did not take advantage of opportunities that he had, even when they were abusing David.
But Shimei has an interest in seeing the good name of David dragged through the mud.
That's right. Yeah.
So he's hurling all sorts of
Abuse.
right? Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
It really.
yeah.
Well, he was also throwing stones. So we can say that there really was abuse there, throwing stones at him.
And not to steal your thunder in your sermon, but what does David do, and what does David say when his colleagues are like, hey, let's go take this dude out?
Yeah. He says, maybe God sent him to curse me.
Yeah.
Let's just see.
Speaking of magnanimity,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Having insults and stones hurled at you.
That's right.
And instead of saying with the snap of your finger, you could go, have that man beheaded.
Mm-hmm. My own son has chased me out of Jerusalem and wants me off the throne. And should we not allow this Benjaminite to have a moment?
Think about, an argument maybe you've been in with a friend or spouse or a colleague, and maybe in that moment you knew that what they had to say about you or about that situation was right. And what's the first thing that your mind goes to? Maybe this is just me. You start replaying in your mind times when that person has hurt you, so that you can bring those things back up to say, see,
Oh yeah, but what
you-
about?
exactly. What
Yeah,
about?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good, I'm not the only one. All right.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping you wouldn't realize I was talking about you.
Oh, that's enough. Yeah, I think again, this is it ties back to speaking the truth maliciously to a wrong end, perverting the truth to a wrong meaning. You hear a report, and rather than seeking restoration between the parties, you involve as many other people as you can to find as many other reports, going back as far as you can go to just bring a person down. And there's so much of these things are tied together, and we see happen all the time, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me close with an encouraging note. I hope it'll be an encouraging note to you.
Yes, please.
And that is going back to the 144. What are the duties required in the Ninth Commandment? And I'd commend that to all of our listeners to read through both 144 and 145. But what's required here in 144 is summed up here in this clause: studying and practicing whatsoever things are true, honest, lovely, and of good report.
Mm.
Amen.
Echoing Paul's words to Philippians, give yourselves to these things. Study whatsoever is true, honest, lovely, and of good report. Give yourself to those things. Don't give yourselves to the work of the devil, who is the slanderer of the brethren, who oftentimes doesn't even need to lift a finger because we do his work for him.
Mm.
Instead, give yourselves to these things. Any last words, brothers, before we sign off?
No, sir.
Thank you for joining us on this part 2 episode of Sins of the Tongue on the Three Presbyteers. We hope you were edified and encouraged by this discussion, and we are thankful that you tuned in to listen to this discussion, and we will see you next time. But until then,
Walk with the Lord.
Seven miles on a dusty road, two men travel with a heavy load. Friendly stranger comes and joins the walk, fills their hearts when he starts to talk. Fills a time with words of truth, they don't yet know who he is. Walk with the Lord. Walk with the Lord. Troubled woman sits by the well, sinful past as he can tell. Sits and listens to this Jewish man, already knows and he shares a plan. Living water that'll quench her thirst, she doesn't yet know who he is. Walk with the Lord. Walk with the Lord. Young and proud, a Pharisee meets the Lord and he couldn't see. Truth has shown and changed his views. Now he knows and he shares the news. Chief of sinners spreads the word. He knows now who he is. Walk with the Lord. Walk with the Lord. Walk with the Lord. Walk with the Lord. Living word and the bread of life puts to rest all your worldly strife. He's chosen you before it all. Walk with him and you'll never fall. His yoke is easy and his burden's light. All you need to do is walk. Walk with the Lord. Walk with the Lord. Gotta walk with the Lord.